I returned to fix the old paging system, only for it to send smoke signals back to the hospital. Turns out it was a meltdown. Approximately 2 days later, I received a return call from Hospital 400. They informed me that the system had inexplicably stopped reporting again without any prior warning. Great! I had reinstalled the original motherboard but had left the replacement power supply connected. Initially, I suspected the original motherboard was defective, but I was unaware of what led to its malfunction. Do you recall how I found myself trapped in the back room in my earlier story? Well, to Hospital 400 credit, they managed to fix the "how do I exit without sounding the alarm" issue within just 2 days of my feedback. They put up a picture of the sensor on the door, and the sensor was now marked "wave to exit." Moreover, they had moved the shelf away from the wall, clearing the view of the sensor. Thank you, maintenance. I arrived equipped with a replacement motherboard, a new power supply, and a Module F. I also brought my laptop along with a serial USB cable in case I needed to reconfigure any settings. Little did I realize the spectacle I was about to encounter. This marked the beginning of my workday, which will become significant as the narrative unfolds. When I approached the rack, this time the screen illuminated when I pressed the buttons. I entered the passcode assigned to all the systems in our area, but it displayed incorrect, suggesting that some configuration data had been lost. This implied that the unit had experienced a power loss and the internal memory backup battery was depleted. Yes, the unit was old enough that it relied on a battery to retain its settings during power interruptions. Yet, it had not lost its settings when I rebooted it 2 days earlier. Go figure. After powering everything down, I removed the motherboard and got out my voltage meter to verify the battery was indeed dead. It was. Unfortunately, the battery on the replacement motherboard we had been carrying was also worthless. Notably, while the battery was still produced and available, contemporary devices hardly utilized it, making it challenging to find at local stores. I also lacked the necessary materials to create a temporary adapter for AAA batteries or a coin cell to serve as a substitute. Moreover, the minimal information available to us mere technicians left me in the dark about whether the battery we were replacing was rechargeable. Therefore, I wouldn't know whether to opt for alkaline or nickel-cadmium batteries even if I had a means to create an adapter. To top it off, none of our designated suppliers provided any specifications regarding the battery, not even whether it was rechargeable. Time to call for technical support. I dialed them, and oh no, I forgot to look up the part number on the battery itself. Since service was spotty in that back area, I stepped out into the main room. To my surprise, it turned out that it was not a rechargeable battery. That meant the jury rig adapter option was still feasible, albeit not the most appealing solution. I was uncertain whether Company B would approve that, unless the battery in question was actually discontinued, rather than simply unavailable locally. At least I now knew what I was searching for. Configuring the system without the battery would have been futile. Once the battery arrived, we would need to remove the motherboard to install it, which would inevitably require powering down the unit. There was simply no way around that. There wasn't enough space to maneuver the battery into position with the motherboard in place. Alternatively, we could program it now and wait for the next power outage to change the battery and reprogram it again. The battery would presumably have arrived by then. I contacted my workplace to see if they had any spare batteries available. They did, but they were located about 45 minutes away from Hospital 400 one way. Not the most convenient option, but it was the only viable choice left. I called technical support, simply to request a checklist of things to examine while I awaited the battery, to keep myself busy rather than idly sitting around. He mentioned checking the rooftop antenna and the wiring leading to it, as well as the connections behind the rack. He also suggested pulling the self-diagnostic data from any operational motherboard, even if it had lost its programming. I might as well get the roof tasks done first, considering it was my least favorite aspect of the job. I wasn't afraid of heights, but my physical fitness at the time made climbing ladders more difficult. After acquiring the keys to access the roof, I climbed up with my tools. Nothing seemed amiss with the antenna or the cables leading to it, but just in case, I unwrapped the tape surrounding the connections. They appeared fine, so I rewrapped them. Was this a wasted trip? Not necessarily. As a technician, It's always prudent to eliminate any potential issues you can address when time allows. In this instance, we had already received a callback to the same location for complications that couldn't be connected in any way, which justified my thoroughness to avoid yet another failure. Once back inside, I reinstalled the motherboard and powered the system on again. It wouldn't transmit anything without programming to prevent interference during repairs or configuration. Do you remember how the password for the front panel was rejected? Well, I knew the default password. Unfortunately, one of the keys on the keypad was worn out. Of course, I hadn't packed an extra for that. Luckily, I could access most functions via the serial port. This also required a separate password, but you simply typed that into the computer, not the keypad. It felt somewhat excessive to require a password for something that would have originally necessitated a key to open the rack. However, the password continued to work long after all the locks on the racks had either disintegrated or jammed shut and needed to be drilled out. Additionally, anyone could purchase a serial cable or a USB to serial adapter. I navigated through the process of pulling all the self-diagnostic data that was available before programming the motherboard. I documented everything in a text file on my work laptop, even if I didn't believe it was significant. I figured it was better to have too much information than too little, given that I was not printing it on paper, and we were only discussing an additional 10 lines, not 10 pages or 100 megabytes of data. I acknowledge that 100 megabytes is minimal by today's standards, but that much text could fill a book. Just an example of where you would consider what constitutes too much. I received a phone call. The delivery person from work had arrived at the hospital with the battery. I picked it up from him, expressing my gratitude and apologizing for how absurd it must have felt to drive 45 minutes just to deliver a battery. Once I installed the battery, the next task was to program the system. I had never done this before, so I contacted technical support. Their initial suggestion was to connect my phone to the laptop to remotely assist me through the entire process. We attempted this, but the back room had poor cellular reception. It was sufficient for texting and voice calls, but inadequate for actual internet connectivity. Hospital Wi-Fi. That was a no-go. Their security protocols forbade devices not provided by the hospital from connecting to their network. This rule also extended to their wired network, which meant that even if there was an Ethernet jack available in the back room and a means to connect my laptop, we would have still been out of luck. Given that hospitals handle sensitive patient information, this policy made sense. Plan C involved me heading to the main room and allowing him to remotely access the laptop, while he documented all the commands I would need to enter in a text document. This way, I could execute the commands manually but still have all the information readily available, allowing me to proofread my entries before pressing Enter on each line. Tedious, I know, but someone had to do it. Roughly an hour and a half later, I had passed the point that would typically be my lunch break. Since I had completed typing all the commands, I opted to test the system by contacting the test pager I brought specifically for this purpose. I dialed the pager with my phone. Everything sounded correct over the phone, but the pager failed to beep. It was undoubtedly powered on, yet it did not respond. I waited a few minutes, and still, nothing happened. I called it again, and the same issue occurred. Thus, I reached out to Company BTK's tech support once more. I asked where I should check to verify whether the motherboard had received any data. He informed me that there was no method to ascertain that. I inquired further if he could see from his end how far the packet got before it stopped. He explained that the system lacked any means of providing feedback to indicate how far a call had progressed before failure, not from either end of the communication chain. The system interacted with the main hubs via landline. However, you could disconnect the landline, call the pager, and the main hubs would not report any error because it was strictly one-way communication. You read that correctly the same system that routinely reported whether it was okay, had no means to confirm whether a message was successfully delivered to the pager or even to the transmitter unit in the hospital. Further complicating matters was the fact that there was no message sent to the central hubs when a transmitter unit was restarted. The tech support representative asked if the hospital had an analog landline phone I could borrow. I inquired around for one, but by that time, They only had Ethernet-based digital phones, no more traditional landline phones. However, I knew the expected voltage of a landline 48 volts, more or less. A quick test with my multimeter confirmed it was accurate. I requested the pinout of the power supplies from tech support in case a voltage discrepancy existed that could trigger the red error light on the front. Unfortunately, I learned that the manufacturer didn't provide the pinout of the power supplies, even to top-tier tech support agents like him. This effectively left me with no way to diagnose the power supplies except by swapping them. I informed tech support that I hadn't yet tried replacing Module F. He gave me the go-ahead for that. I hung up, needing both hands for the task, and seeing no reason to keep him on the line just to listen to me remove a module. This particular module wasn't as straightforward to replace, as it had a coaxial wire hidden behind one of the covers that required unscrewing. Once I accomplished that, I rebooted the rack. I made the obligatory test call, only to experience failure once more. Uncertain of a way to extract the configuration data from the motherboard and verify it for typographical errors, I decided to redo everything but meticulously check each entry before hitting enter this time, which delayed me further. Still no success. Between replacing Module F and redoing the motherboard configuration, I had squandered another hour to find myself back at square one. Feeling hungry, I scribbled on my makeshift, on-the-go, time card that I needed to step out for lunch. While en route, Company B called to ask if the system was up and running again. I explained that I had replaced Module F and attempted to redo the motherboard configuration in case I had made an error, yet the pages still hadn't gone through. He mentioned that the upper management had approved Saturday overtime if needed to restore the system. I informed him I was on my way to lunch and had delayed it considerably to rectify the situation. Thankfully, he did not contest my statement. Internally anxious about the prospect of losing my weekend to this outdated contraption, I cut my lunch to 30 minutes instead of the usual hour, hoping to avoid that fate or make significant headway in the process. After my abbreviated lunch break, I returned to the hospital. With nothing better to try, I swapped the power supplies, switching the one that powered the amplifier with the one that powered everything else. Still nothing. Running out of alternatives, I replaced the motherboard. After transferring the battery to the new board, I connected my laptop and redid all the configurations once more. After all that, I reviewed the error logs, and nothing appeared, which was a positive sign. I initiated the test call to the pager and nothing occurred. However, no errors were reported either. I called tech support again, and they inquired if I had another motherboard available to test. I explained that I did not. He stated he would contact someone else from Company B to bring me 2 amplifiers and 2 motherboards. At this point, I found myself with nothing to occupy my time, not even busy work that would contribute anything meaningful or make my job easier when the parts arrived. When the new components arrived, tech support instructed me to replace both the amplifier and the motherboard, advising against returning either of the originals, even if the initial attempt didn't work. He suggested that I swap out both with the second pair instead of proceeding one at a time to avoid the possibility that one might damage the other. The first motherboard did not even boot, so I replaced both it and the amplifier with the second pair and transferred the battery to the replacement board. After redoing all the configuration tasks yet again, I conducted the test call. The pager finally beeped, "Success." I contacted Company B tech support to inform them that the second set of components provided was the functional one. I marked all the removed modules as defective and packed everything up. By this point, I knew I would be tardy returning to base, but that merely meant overtime pay, including the half hour of lunch I had, lost. Overall, I felt a sense of pride in maintaining my composure while communicating with others, as well as keeping my external patience to avoid making mistakes or abandoning the ticket. Upon my return to work the following Monday, the supervisor informed me that someone from Company B had to revisit Hospital 400 the previous Saturday because the paging rack had essentially failed catastrophically. He mentioned that every module they pulled out had a burnt smell, and the motherboard was visibly damaged beyond repair. The modules were sent back to ascertain if there was any possibility of salvage. In the meantime, they were essentially in the process of reconstructing the system from scratch, aside from the backplane and wiring. I genuinely anticipated being fired, pun intended, by the end of the week, believing I had somehow caused the destruction of the rack. A few days later, I received news that all of the modules they extracted that Saturday were found to be irreparably damaged. The exact cause was never definitively established, but the prevailing theory suggested that the second power supply, the one powering everything except the amplifier, had somehow shorted, resulting in a voltage surge that fried everything connected. However, this did not explain why the amplifier and its separate power supply had also failed. The only link to the motherboard was the data and signal lines. They did not share any connections related to power supplies. Had there been a wiring failure within the hospital, or if lightning had struck the building or power lines directly, multiple systems within the hospital would have been compromised. It's worth mentioning that the paging system was on one of the critical circuits, which not only was attached to the backup generator, but also had significantly more protection against surges and noise compared to devices like televisions and lights. In conclusion, I was determined not to be held accountable, and my job was secure. I eventually departed from that position, not due to that particular system's issues, but because I frequently encountered extended periods without actual tickets to address, leaving me with no busy work to assist my colleagues. Consequently, I was genuinely apprehensive that they would realize my redundancy or lack of necessity, potentially resulting in my layoff. The company had a somewhat complicated relationship with the paging system, as it was the only component requiring frequent maintenance. However, it had deteriorated to the extent that achieving target uptime objectives alongside restoring service speed became nearly impossible. The primary challenge was the inability to troubleshoot individual modules effectively. We lacked the ability to bench test them and did not possess sufficient specifications to conduct necessary measurements. If we had access to functioning modules, we could have ruled some out that way. But since new ones were no longer available, we were reliant on modules returned from repair shops that still handled these systems, including the original equipment manufacturer. Unfortunately, the modules deemed repaired proved so unreliable that simply replacing a part did not eliminate the issue, even with multiple replacements. To summarize, 2 days after fixing a paging system, I had to return to address it again. I needed to postpone my lunch and work overtime to revive that antiquated equipment. The following day, it failed completely. Story 2. My partner, 43/F, and I, 39/F, are trying to figure out if we should move or not. My partner, 43F, and I, 39F, have been in a relationship for nearly 4 years. We certainly know we are the right match for each other, and when I say everything is wonderful in our relationship, I truly mean it. We are each other's support system, and it is a genuine partnership. We are committed to facing the good and the bad, the simple and the more challenging aspects of life together. We reside in a predominantly conservative southern state within a progressive city. We are a same-gender couple, and we vote for the Democratic Party. I have lived here for 9 years, as I relocated for my profession. Unfortunately, that profession has largely moved overseas from many parts of the United States, not just this state, so I am currently transitioning to a career that allows me to work from home. My partner has a very stable career in the library field that she has developed over the past 20 years. She grew up in this area and has never lived anywhere else. Most of her friends are located here, with a few who have relocated in the last few years due to political issues and concerns about personal safety, preferring not to stay in a conservative state. I have relocated multiple times throughout my adult life for work, so adapting to new environments is something I'm accustomed to. Now, here comes the difficult part. I no longer want to remain in our state. There are several reasons, some political and others simply related to lifestyle, quality of life, culture, and geography. The mental transition began when my career predominantly left the United States, and I started to question, what is keeping me here in this state, since my profession, which brought me here, is no longer present? The answer is my partner. She is the sole reason I am still here. I strongly dislike the weather, the traffic, the pervasive hustle culture where everyone seems to be just getting by, the wealth inequality, the disregard for the natural environment, the inadequate healthcare system, and the insufficient childcare and schools outside of private institutions, among other issues. The state I wish to move to does not present these problems. Of course, every location has its own challenges, but I would be content with the trade-offs. As I approach my 40s, my priorities have shifted. I would like to live in a place with better access to nature and colder weather. I participate in various winter sports. Additionally, I want to reside in a community with more like-minded individuals, not only politically but also with respect to a love of the outdoors, a strong healthcare system, quality education, and support for the arts and social programs. Moreover, I have close friends who are from there and are planning to move back soon, and my partner also appreciates these friends, so we would not be starting from scratch in terms of a social group. Financially speaking, the cost of living in that state is similar to what we currently experience. First and foremost, I want to mention that my partner is open to relocating with me. However, she has concerns that she may need to take a step back in her career to establish herself in a new state. I am somewhat doubtful of that, as she is exceptionally talented and a valuable asset to any team, but I understand her perspective. There will certainly be a period of adjustment given that she has been in her current job for 20 years. Life here has become easy for her. She knows the people, the community, the job's rhythm, and transitioning to a new environment will indeed require adaptation. There appear to be numerous opportunities for her in the other state, as libraries are abundant and generally well-funded there, more so than where we currently live. My partner is receptive to the idea of moving, but she wants to be as certain as possible that it is the correct decision because it represents a significant change in her life. I understand that nothing is guaranteed, but I also want her to feel joyful about the choice if we do decide to move. Our mutual happiness is my top priority. Regarding her lifestyle, I genuinely believe she would thrive there. Her primary hobbies are reading and crafting, and the state I am eager to move to is a haven for crafters. I am considering what our next steps should be. I have visited the state I wish to move to, but she has not yet. Clearly, the first order of business is to visit together, allowing her to experience what it is like and engage with locals, hopefully including some newcomers as well. I do not want to rush this process. I feel fortunate to be transitioning into a remote job that allows me to work from anywhere. I have contemplated the idea of spending some time there on my own in the short term, while she could visit for weekends, and we could explore the state in a more leisurely manner over time before making any major relocation decisions. We have also discussed the possibility of acquiring a vacation home there to divide our time between the two states, and I am open to that if she is not entirely on board with moving there full-time. I appreciate that she is considering this as a potential fallback option since I can no longer envision myself staying in our current state permanently. The summers are simply overwhelming for me. What are your thoughts? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wished to relocate while your partner was uncertain or lacked confidence about it, or vice versa? What occurred and what assisted you in making your decision? In summary, I am 39F, eager to move from a conservative southern state to a progressive northern state, where the cost of living is similar. My partner, 43F, is open to the idea but is not yet convinced. How can we explore the possibility of moving together? My highest priority is ensuring my partner is content with the move. Story 3. My 20F, mom 55F, is very controlling about my personal life, and I had a terrible argument with my sister, 20F, about it and don't know what to do. I apologize in advance, as English is not my first language, and this post may be quite lengthy. I am a 20-year-old female living with my parents. It all began 2 years ago when I started college. My mother insisted on tracking my location because she does not trust anyone. When I told her that her behavior was excessive and controlling, she yelled at me and pressured me to download a tracking application, which is Life 360. I have essentially lived with that app for the past 2 years. Before downloading it, I hadn't even had my first kiss, so I have no idea why she didn't trust me. She made my sister download it as well, but she did not pressure her as much. My mother never allowed me to stay out after 5 or 6 p.m. I had to return home by then. If I stayed out longer, she would be furious and call me derogatory names for being out so late. She does not have the same issues with my sister since she rarely goes out. However, recently things spiraled out of control. Last summer, I had sexual intercourse with someone. I realized this was extremely foolish as we did not use protection. I became suspicious of any potential sexually transmitted diseases, so I was very anxious about it. I made the mistake of telling my mother that I was frightened of being infected with HIV and wanted to get tested. I know I shouldn't have shared this with her, but since she is a doctor, she would have access to my test results on an online medical platform, even if I got tested at a hospital where she does not work. Therefore, I thought it better to inform her rather than risk her discovering the results herself online. I have a lip piercing, and I mentioned that I was concerned about it. She did not believe me and assumed I had been sexually active. She shamed me, saying that I was no longer her daughter, showed no concern for my situation, and instructed me to get tested elsewhere so I wouldn't embarrass her. By the way, I would use a fake GPS application if I were to have sex, so she wouldn't become suspicious. I cried very hard that day. I then went to the hospital to get tested, and the results came back negative after 7 months post-exposure. After that incident, my mother said she could not trust me any longer. Yesterday, something occurred. I went out with my date around 5 p.m., and since my mother, father, and sister were not at home, I was not concerned about returning late. I merely informed my brother, 26-year-old male, and asked him to keep quiet or my mother would go into a frenzy, given that her trust in me has diminished. He agreed. While I was with my date, my mother called and asked how I was doing. I lied, stating that I was at home relaxing. I used the fake GPS. She inquired about my brother, and I told her she could call him. She mentioned she would be home in 2 hours. I then called my brother and requested that he do not reveal my whereabouts and pretend that I was at home. He responded by questioning why I was lying and threatened to tell our mother everything. At that point, I was incredibly angry, and my date was somewhat ruined. My mother, obviously hearing everything, became furious and called me repeatedly. She said she had no faith or trust left in me. I remained silent and hung up. I am just extremely exhausted from all this nonsense. I am 20 years old, and I have the right to go out in the evening and have a sexual life. Don't worry, I use protection. It was just that one time. The latest I have returned home was 10 p.m., and yesterday I came home at 9 p.m. This morning, I spoke with my sister about my brother informing on me, and I expressed my desire not to talk to him. She countered by saying that they both informed on me, not just him. I asked how she knew I was not at home since she had not been there. She replied that she concluded I was lying poorly. I questioned her why she would do that, knowing it would upset our mother and that she already did not trust me. She said, "You didn't even give me a heads up. I would not have informed if you had told me you were going out. Your behavior is inappropriate and abnormal. You should see a therapist to sort yourself out. You are effectively a promiscuous person, and I hope you experience assault and become pregnant someday to understand our perspective. You are foolish, thinking every man is trustworthy and sleeping with them. I don't know if this is relevant, but my number of sexual partners is 3. I was not expecting her to express such repulsive things, and I was shocked by her words. She seemed even angrier than my mother, shouting at me as if in a rage. For your information, my father, 55-year-old male, is not involved in these family issues. He is not strict or controlling, but he is rather indifferent and disengaged as a parent. He only acknowledges that my mother is very demanding and strict, but he does not take any action. I have tried to defend myself and stand up for myself, but it seems futile. I feel hopeless and depressed. I knew my mother would be upset, but I did not expect my sister to be so disgusted with me. By the way, my sister is my twin. I do not know how to manage all of this. What can I do to move past these feelings? Currently, there is no possibility of moving out. I am a college student and do not have enough time for a part-time job because of my classes. I maintain a high GPA, so it's not about academics, just about my personal life. I genuinely feel terrible and have isolated myself from everyone. I feel so depressed and drained. I doubt I will ever speak to my sister again after her hurtful words, and I am uncertain about my brother's situation. It feels like I am living in confinement. I apologize for the excessively long post. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Story 4. I, 24M, Feel drained in a relationship with my GF, 22F, because she does everything for me and expects me to do the same. Is there such a thing as giving too much of yourself in a relationship? First of all, I understand that the title may sound negative. English is not my first language, and I couldn't find a better way to phrase it, but please hear me out. I apologize in advance for the lengthy text. There is a summary at the end. I, 24 male, have been in a relationship with my current girlfriend, 22 female, for 4 years. I am her first boyfriend, whereas I have had a few relationships before her. From the very beginning, it was clear that we were quite different. I am very rational, while she is entirely emotional. However, we loved each other deeply and were happy together, which allowed us to overcome our differences. I learned to be more emotional, while she worked on being more rational as we sought to find balance in the relationship. Unfortunately, for at least a year, things have not been going well. She is an amazing person who always supports me and is eager to help. However, she also makes herself available and expects me to do the same, to spend time with me. A couple of examples include her frequently asking me to work from her home. I work remotely, on regular weekdays just so we can be together. She currently does not have a job. She insists on accompanying me when I run errands, such as going to the doctor or visiting shops to sell my car, to the point where it feels like we must do those things together. On weekends, we rarely spend time apart. Typically, I will sleep over at her place on Friday, and she will stay at mine on Saturday, or vice versa. While we are together, she always wants to engage in activities, mostly watching TV shows or movies or just kissing. To clarify, it's just kissing non-stop, without anything sexual. She claims she enjoys looking at me and kissing me, and while I appreciate that, I do not feel inclined to kiss her for 20 to 30 minutes continuously. In fact, over our 4 years together, I can count on my fingers the occasions when we did our own separate activities, like me playing video games while she reads a book. On the other hand, I am someone who enjoys spending time alone and focusing on my own interests. I feel content having someone accompany me while running errands, but it is not something I require. I am perfectly fine doing them by myself. However, I feel guilty if I do not invite her whenever I have something to do. While I appreciate our time together, I wish we had a more balanced dynamic involving separate activities. I genuinely value my independence and believe I have lost a significant portion of it in this relationship. That said, here is the problem that has been troubling me. We frequently argue because of her behavior, always making herself available, going to great lengths to spend time with me, while I do not reciprocate in the same way. Recently, I have been making an effort to have more time for myself and do not approach conflicts from the same perspective as she does. For example, we had a significant argument yesterday that carried over into today because she had to stay at my place on Sunday, but I wanted to wake up early today to go to the gym before I started working. She, however, expected me to want to stay next to her for as long as possible, which meant sleeping until I started working. While it was possible to go to the gym after work and do what she wanted, she had asked me earlier to visit her during my lunch hour, which I agreed to. This meant I would not have time to work out after work and needed to go in the morning. Working out is non-negotiable for me. I consider it extremely important and strive not to skip a day. From my perspective, there was no issue. I could work out, return, shower, and wake her up just as I would have done if I had only slept instead of going to the gym. Conversely, she thought I should have viewed it as an exceptional situation where she was spending the night on a Sunday, and that I should cherish the time with her. Since I did not think that way, she felt like she was disrupting my routine, which upset her. When I explained that my desire to go early stemmed from wanting to be with her all afternoon, and that I wouldn't have time to exercise later, she reminded me that last Friday, she drove me to a mechanic to leave my car for service. Keep in mind, my car had been towed, and I could have borrowed my parents' car, when she should have been studying for the BAR exam. She said she was treating me this way, being supportive, even when she had an important obligation, because that was how she wanted to be treated, and I should reciprocate. I feel that she is contributing too much to the relationship, to the point that it is unhealthy, and she expects me to do the same, which I am uncomfortable with, as I do not believe it is healthy. When I brought this up to her, she claimed to be unable to understand why I wanted her to treat me worse. She said she could comprehend if I had requested better treatment, but wanting her to treat me worse was incomprehensible, as she was not raised that way. Consequently, I have been falling out of love, feeling drained and exhausted from always being with her and complying with her wishes. I worry that my mindset aligns too closely with hers, and that I lack personal time. To compensate for the absence of it on weekends, I have been staying up until 1:30 or 2:00 a.m. on weekdays to have some time for myself to play video games, watch anime, etc. I keep questioning whether I am overreacting and contemplating ending a great relationship because I struggle to understand and navigate her emotions. So, my main question is it possible for someone to give too much of themselves in a relationship? Summary: I believe my girlfriend is investing too much of herself into our relationship while expecting me to do the same, which I find unhealthy for both of us. Story 5. I've been secretly living with my ex for over a year, and I haven't told anyone. So, here it is. This is likely going to seem insane to most of you, but I have been secretly cohabitating with my former partner for more than a year, and only a handful of people are aware of the truth. I have never disclosed this to anyone in my real life because it feels too complicated and shameful, and honestly, I still do not completely grasp why I am doing it. To provide some context, my ex and I were together for roughly 4 years before we separated. It was not a dramatic breakup, we simply grew apart. We had some issues, primarily communication challenges, but also diverging life goals. We both agreed it was for the best, and we parted on relatively amicable terms. However, here is the kicker: when the breakup occurred, neither of us actually moved out of the apartment where we had been living together. We had signed a lease for an additional year, and neither of us could afford to terminate it, so we just continued living there. We both agreed that we would sleep in different rooms, avoid discussing our past relationship, and essentially just coexist as roommates. Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, right? Yes, that is what I thought as well. But the reality is, living together, we started to revert to old habits. We would hang out and talk about random topics, watch films, and engage in some of the same activities we used to enjoy when we were dating. It was not romantic, but it also was not entirely platonic. There was a peculiar, almost nostalgic connection between us, as if we were best friends who knew each other too well to simply walk away completely. As time passed, it just became our reality. We would both go on dates, occasionally bringing people home, but it always felt uncomfortable. And when we did have new acquaintances over, we would try to pretend we were just friends. To everyone else, we appeared to be the strange ex-couple who decided to stick together for financial reasons. No one really questioned it, but I believe they secretly thought we were irrational. I mean, who voluntarily continues living with their former partner. However, then something unusual occurred. I began to realize that I was still in love with him. I am not sure when this realization transpired. Perhaps it was the late-night conversations, or how much we still seemed to understand each other without even speaking. I would find myself noticing little details about him that I used to cherish, like how he laughed at corny jokes or how he consistently left his socks on the bathroom floor. It was as if we were still a couple, but without the commitment. And here's the aspect I cannot quite articulate: he began to act as if he was in love with me again too. Not in a "let us reunite" manner, but more like we had become an old married couple who fell into a routine. I suspect he had been secretly hoping I would reconsider getting back together, but I never did, or at least I reassured myself that I never would. However, deep down, I believe I was clinging to the hope that if we just continued living together long enough, things would revert to how they were. So I kept pretending. I acted as though I was perfectly fine living in this uncertain space, but it was consuming me internally. No one knew the truth. I would observe my friends posting about their relationships on social media, going on romantic trips, getting engaged, and here I was, trapped in this peculiar, quiet little world with my ex, where we were both too afraid to acknowledge that we had never truly moved on from one another. Now, we find ourselves a year into this strange arrangement, and I am still unsure how to break the cycle. Part of me believes I am doing the right thing by not rushing into a decision. Perhaps we need more time to understand who we are outside of one another. But another part of me is frightened that I am simply wasting time, convincing myself that this strange in-between state is sufficient. The hardest part is keeping this secret. I feel like a fraud when I speak to my friends and family about my love life. Everyone assumes I have moved on and am simply enjoying my best single life, but the truth is, I have never fully let go of him. I do not know if I am holding on to something that has already ended, or if we are merely in this peculiar limbo because we are both too scared to completely let go. I am uncertain about what to do. I do not want to live in this odd, unspoken dynamic indefinitely, but I also do not want to hurt him or myself by making a hasty decision. I am caught between the desire to take a leap of faith and reunite, or simply leave and never look back. Yet every time I contemplate leaving, I remember the years we shared together, and suddenly, I feel as if I am abandoning something that still has potential. I am uncertain about what the future has in store for us, but I realize I cannot continue living this way forever. I do not even know if anyone would comprehend the mess I have created, or if I am merely overanalyzing everything. Anyway, thank you for listening. I needed to express this.